London, Paris, Brussels. When people think of Europe, they often think of the continent's major cities first. After all, this is where the EU institutions and pro-European initiatives are based, where major demonstrations take place and where the pulse of the times is felt. In contrast to this image is my home. In Herzogenrath, a small town near the border triangle of the Netherlands and Belgium, the only European idea seems to be crossing the border to get cheaper fuel. At the first glance, at least. In Herzogenrath, European Memorial Days are organized by local student councils. The initiatives don't even have their own website. Waste collection days are coordinated across borders with friends from neighboring countries, and the U15 soccer teams also compete against Dutch clubs. The European idea is alive and well in rural areas, but it's more subtle here. My hometown taught me that quantity says nothing about the quality of commitment. 28% of the EU population lived in rural areas in 2015. We cannot possibly manage this project called Europe alone, but neither can the metropolitan areas without us. While most political stakeholders, institutions, and initiatives would probably agree with this statement, the hurdles in the concrete implementation of pro-European projects in rural areas quickly become clear. Structural weaknesses in communication channels, local administrations, and infrastructure make it extremely difficult to firmly establish public European funding and funding opportunities. In short, Europe's rural areas are still being neglected when it comes to promoting pro-European commitment, and this is precisely why I would like to address this topic. After all, the lack of support is not a theoretical problem. Real talent and opportunities are being lost in rural areas, because they are far too rarely given the support they deserve. My journey began in France, in Paris to be precise. You're probably wondering now, why am I traveling to the capital of a country when my research focus is on the rural areas of Europe? The answer is quite simple. Firstly, the structural weaknesses of rural regions meant that, in most cases, it was not possible for me to travel far outside the metropolitan areas. Secondly, my personal contacts in the cities were just stronger. Through fellow students, I was always able to organize numerous interviews from rural areas in the cities of the countries I was traveling to. But more on that later. For now, I'm going to meet Alyosha. We agreed on him remaining anonymous, so I'm going to tell you about him and his experiences rather than me playing a recording of our interview. Alyosha is actually from Germany, but is currently in Paris for an internship. He's getting the money for it through Erasmus. In Germany, his hometown is actually located in an extremely rural area, which is why Paris was a big change. One of the questions I asked him throughout our meeting was whether he thinks he has more opportunities in European cities than in the rural areas, to which he agreed. Me and Alyosha continued to talk about his own socio-political commitment. His university is located in a rather small town near the Swiss and Austrian border. There are not too much socio-political activities for young people there. However, he is active in an initiative that supports the interest of the first-generation students at his university. While I find this commitment incredibly important, I can't help but think to myself, without the university in the city, this socio-political commitment would simply not exist. What initiatives would be left for young people to get involved in anyway? As I was making my way from France to England by train, I got in contact with a girl named Sarah. Sarah is from a small village north of Cambridge and was visiting a friend in Paris. She would also like to remain anonymous. She talked to me about growing up in a village and seeing many families, friends and relatives moving to bigger cities and how that impacted her. Because while she was lonely at times, she never really considered moving anywhere else. The small village was not only her home, but also part of her identity as a young British woman. She feels connected to the people living there and has always been very vocal about the challenges faced by villages in rural England. She's always in close contact with her local politicians, making her a great example of how political commitment might look like outside of big cities. One of my personal goals for this scholarship was to visit Ireland. Apart from all the obvious great reasons to do so, there's also a very relevant one against the background of my research topic. In Austria, Greece, Finland and Portugal, more than half of the population lives in rural areas. but the highest proportion of the population living in predominantly rural areas within Europe was found in Ireland. In Ireland, I stayed for a week in Dublin with an Airbnb host called Linda. Linda was not only extremely friendly, but also very chatty and shared a lot about Irish culture with me. Originally, Linda is from near Cashel, which is southern of Dublin. After leaving school, she felt that she could not thrive in her hometown, which is why she moved to Dublin. There's no socio-political commitment in Cashel, which is a strong contrast to Dublin. She explained that for a long time she didn't even know what political and social opportunities existed in the city. She experienced all of this in one swoop when she started living and working in Dublin. Global political issues were not only discussed here, but they were dealt with here. Finally, I visited Vienna, Austria. This is where I met Viola. Viola and I met through an NGO we both work at. Said NGO campaigns for better care for people affected by endometriosis in Germany. The NGO is part of a global network and cooperates with other people and similar organizations in Europe in particular. What is special about this NGO is that most of the people who are involved come from rural areas, which is why we mainly work online. There are no headquarters or something like that, which is quite unusual, but also full of opportunities. During my journey, I encountered many limits to my research, which were often directly related to structural weaknesses of the rural regions I wanted to research. Interrail trains did not travel to rural areas, contact could not be arranged, interview requests with abandoned initiatives came to nothing. It was different with Viola. Not only was I able to interview her in Vienna without any complications, but we also knew each other beforehand through our joint engagement, which takes place entirely digitally. When we were talking about my research topic, we quickly realized that yes, we have the same hurdles as all the other people from rural areas I have discussed with so far, but we are overcoming these together in our work using modern approaches. We now even have the support of the German government, which this year implemented a change in the law that makes hybrid and digital association meetings possible without any complications. Much of my journey was unexpected, complicated, and frustrating. And yes, I have had the expectation with which I started my journey confirmed. Often, socio-political engagement in rural areas exists only sporadically, if it exists at all. But there is hope. After all, new funding programs such as the Schwarzkopf scholarship or digitalized association rights are promoting engagement in rural areas. Everything is far from perfect, but all is not lost either. A first step in the right direction would certainly be to shift the European focus from metropolitan areas to rural areas. That can only be to the benefit of us all.